Welcome, District 1 and District 6 and allies. We are here tonight to talk about taxing big business, specifically the tax Amazon legislation. We have invited many council members here tonight: Lisa Herbold in District 1, Dan Strauss in District 6, and at-large council members Teresa Mosqueda and Lorena Gonzalez. Unfortunately, none of them are here tonight. Neither Herbold nor Strauss are here to be able to listen to their constituents. This has been the second town hall this month where we have not had Councilmember Gonzalez, and Teresa Mosqueda has sent a statement, which I will be reading later during this program. It's very unfortunate that we are not able to speak to our council members in District 1 and District 6 to have them understand how important and passionate that we are about taking care of our fellow citizens and residents in this time of COVID crisis. I think that this is a really good opportunity for us to listen to each other and to share, and also to reach out to our council members to ask them to please get involved and please understand how many people are living on the edge and falling off the edge, and that we need action now. We need to tax big business and we need to tax Amazon. After we hear from the community tonight and field your questions, we're going to give everyone at this meeting the opportunity to take action, to reach out to Councilmember Strauss and to Councilmember Herbold, and to ask that they please communicate with us and listen to us about how important it is to pass this legislation. We wanted this town hall to focus on Districts 1 and 6 because those council members have been elected as progressives. I did a lot to help elect Dan Strauss, and we want them to act as progressives and help us pass this crucial legislation. This is the second town hall that we've done. The first one was on May 5th, and we had D4 and D7. So your being here tonight is part of the grassroots activism that is going to be required to pass this incredibly important, crucial legislation. As many of you know, we in Seattle have the most regressive tax code in the state, with the most regressive tax code in the entire United States. We are worse than Mississippi, we are worse than Louisiana, worse than South Dakota. We are the worst in our city and our state. And it is long past time for us to right this wrong. This wrong hurts the poorest among us twice. It hurts them because they pay more taxes than the uber wealthy and the mega corporations. And on top of that, they do not get the crucial and important services and safety net that they most need. And right now, that safety net is all that is holding some people in place and keeping them alive. And many people are struggling. This is a crisis. It's a human crisis, a health crisis, an economic crisis. I'm in many organizations and many Facebook groups where people are asking for bankruptcy lawyers so that they can declare bankruptcy during this time, either because they're not getting the benefits they need, because they are a worker who can't get to work because they're taking care of their children. There are many people who have just fallen off the ledge and into the abyss, and more people are following them. And we absolutely, it's our moral and our human need to help them. It is our imperative, and we are here tonight to be able to move things forward. We are not just demanding of our council members to pass this legislation and to not have cuts and no austerity. Cuts and austerity are not the way to go here. We are offering the solution. Tax Amazon, tax big business is the solution. And so we haven't just come here with a demand of no cuts, tax big business, but there's an actual legislation that has been proposed by Councilmember Sawant and Councilmember Morales, thank you, so that we can go forward and meet our moral obligations in our community. Also, Amazon is making money hand over fist right now. They're racking it in as their people are sometimes dying and getting coronavirus in the warehouse. They are making money, and their shareholders are getting more and more money, and Jeff Bezos is getting richer and richer. This is also, I really want to discuss really briefly about the fact that this should not be as polarizing as if you dare to read the Seattle Times, makes it out to be, because this is crucial legislation that must pass, and it is not controversial. Even Biden has said we need to tax Amazon. This is our moral imperative, and it is not something that we should be viewing through the Republicans' lens or through the centrist lens. We absolutely must start righting our wrongs from decades of regressive tax code. So now is absolutely the time to tax big business. No to austerity, no to cuts. And I have my son in the background doing a dance, my 13-year-old. And I want to remind you to please submit questions via the chat. And there's different chat functions. However you're watching this live stream, those will be reviewed by staff and then sent to me as we get to the Q&A section. But first, I want to introduce one of the sponsors of the legislation who wrote this legislation and is promoting this legislation, Councilmember Sawant, who Amazon tried to make sure she wasn't reelected, and we all worked our tails off to get her reelected because we knew she was here for the people, and she is sorry, my child is throwing something. She is here for the people, and she is the one who will lead us, her and Councilmember Morales, lead us to be able to care for our environment, have good jobs, and also get people back to work and care for each other during this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Summer. And thanks to everyone who has joined this District 1, District 6 town hall meeting on the tax Amazon legislation. And, first of all, congratulations to all the organizers like Summer who have really worked hard to make this together. And I think as Nick Jones from my office informs us, we have at least 50 people watching on the live stream, which is extremely important. I'm assuming many of them are District 1 and District 6 residents, which is really important. And if you are watching on the live stream and you live in Seattle, it doesn't matter which district you live in, just let us know which district you live in. We'll put you in touch with other organizers in that district, because really if we win anything, and we've shown this again and again, we are able to win, but only on the basis of fighting for what's just, as Summer was saying, and by organizing rank and file community members. It's not going to be one on the basis of any one person doing the right thing. It's going to be on the basis of whether we build a powerful enough momentum in the grassroots or not. And it's just, what strikes me about this evening is the historic moment that we are living through. I mean, obviously, we are in the middle of this unprecedented pandemic where in the richest country in the history of humanity, over 100,000 Americans have died because of coronavirus. I'm not sure how many of those would have been prevented. And then in the middle of all that, we've seen George Floyd saying, "I can't breathe," and his life being stolen by Minneapolis cops and by a deeply racist, oppressive, and anti-poor and anti-working people system. And in response to this, it is incredible to see how people are rising up against the injustice. To be sober, we have a long, long way to go for our movements to get organized powerfully enough to actually bring about the kind of change we need. But there is zero doubt we are at a turning point in our country's history, and our tax Amazon movement is situated in an incredible moment, because Summer correctly said, this is our moral and social imperative, and it contains within itself incredible power, because if we win the Amazon tax here, not only will we be able to carry out a massive expansion in social housing and Green New Deal programs, but we know what's going to come after that. We know it will send energy and enthusiasm among working class people in other cities. And that is precisely why big business and the political establishment are so opposed to us. I agree with Summer, this should not be a polarizing issue. But the reason it is because we are not going to be able to fund this kind of social housing and Green New Deal expansion without taxing big business and the wealthiest people. And they know that if we win here, it will give us momentum in other cities as well. And that's why we have to rely on our own movement. And that's why I'm excited that we have all these constituents of the district, the two districts going to be speaking today, bringing their own voice. And I'm also excited that the executive director of the Economic Opportunity Institute, John Burbank, is with us here. And I think he's going to be sharing some really important information that will ground us in why this is crucial. And as Summer said, we are fed up with the regressive tax system. I need hardly talk about the homelessness and affordable housing crisis that has mushroomed at the same time that big banks, corporate developers, billionaire building owners, and property management corporations have made so much money hand over fist. We need social housing, and for that, we need progressive revenues. But that was before the pandemic. Now you have, in the middle of the pandemic, in addition to that, a public health crisis, a jobs crisis. Well over 100,000 in Seattle have lost their jobs. And these are people who were already living paycheck to paycheck. So this is a serious crisis. And statistics show that the effects of the pandemic are by no means equal or class neutral. We know it is disproportionately, both from the public health standpoint and the job loss standpoint, it is disproportionately affecting poorest people, working families of color, women-led households and children, immigrant community members, basically all the demographics who are already vulnerable before the pandemic. Carrie from District 6 in North Seattle wrote on our petition, I work for UW Medicine and I have seen firsthand what this crisis is doing to even just a fraction of the community, while also seeing friends and family losing jobs, income, and livelihood. We need real solutions now. And the part of the solution that we need is to the unemployment that is now comparable to that during the Great Depression. And, so the mathematics is relentless. The unemployment combined with the fact that our taxes are regressive and that most social programs in our city and our state are funded on the backs of working people, that combined with joblessness automatically implies there is now a major budget cratering at the local and state levels. And this is a very important point we have to share with our friends and neighbors and family members. Even without creating new housing or funding new Green New Deal programs, we are going to have to fight to tax big business, even if we want to just continue the existing social programs for housing, services, education, infrastructure, you name it. So this is not a neutral question. We either fight for and win the taxes on big business and wealthy people, or the alternative is what Mayor Durkin and the political establishment is already signaling towards austerity, as if the budget crunch is an act of God. It's not. You can address the budget crunch, but you will need the political will to tax big business, which is not going to come from most of the politicians. We're going to have to get organized for it. But it's either you tax big business and raise progressive revenues, or you go down the austerity route. And let's remember, austerity means austerity is to us working people and working families and the most marginalized, not for the richest households in our city. And so Amazon tax, let's share this widely. Amazon tax is the antidote to austerity, and it will have a historic impact beyond that in addressing helping to address that. We will need more than the Amazon tax, but it will help to address in a big way the crisis of jobs, of the housing affordability crunch that we have, and the climate change goals that we have. The research numbers are phenomenal from City Hall staff. They're estimating, based on very credible sources, these are not biased towards socialism in any way. These sources tell us that we are projecting about 34,000 jobs through the social housing and Green New Deal program. We have momentum for this Amazon tax movement. And we know it is as progressive as it could possibly be to tax only the top 2% of businesses, and the effective tax rate will come out to be less than 1% of the profits of the richest people. It is not a tax on jobs. It is not a tax on the workers or the employees of these corporations. It will come out of the major shareholders and the owners, the people who pocket most of the profits. And there's real momentum. First of all, the incredible victory won by the working people in Portland, in the Portland area, where overwhelmingly voters approved a tax on big business and on wealthy individuals to address housing and homelessness crisis. The Economic Opportunity Institute has been talking about this for years. So this is huge news for our movement, and we have wind at our back. And do you know why I'm saying this? It's not because I'm a socialist. Danny Westneat, who's an unflinching spokesperson for the ruling class for the Seattle Times, who's not in our Tax Amazon fan club, he was forced to concede last week when he wrote that the wind is at the Tax Amazon movement's back. And he says, Portland area voters, like here, were already very pro-tax, but what was revealing about the vote is that polling showed the economic dislocation of the pandemic made voters even more eager than before to go big on paying for social services for the needy. There you go. The most conservative columnist that we, one of the most conservative columnists in our city has to concede that there is momentum on our side. We know that there is tremendous support for this idea among working people and community members, all the way from construction workers to physicians and residents at the UW hospital are supporting this effort. People are angry that billionaires are profiteering even in this pandemic, while working people are desperate for sheer survival. Sheer survival. Emily from West Seattle's District 1 wrote, I live paycheck to paycheck trying to feed 2 children, and I work in the food industry. I know 97% or more of the industry live paycheck to paycheck like I do. I cannot go 2 weeks without work, let alone 2 months. Who knows how long this shutdown of restaurants is going to last? We need help now. So people are making it very clear. It is simply not acceptable that the crisis of capitalism should be put on the shoulders of workers. Workers did not create this crisis, and we should not have to pay. Our children, our elderly, and other community members should not have to pay. And yet, unfortunately, and this is where our town hall and our movement comes in, and it's the most crucial component of winning this fight, is that despite all these incredible truths about the moment we live in, unfortunately, the city's Democratic Party political establishment, unfortunately, I wish it was different, but it is not. They are still doing the bidding of the wealthiest, while they're being forced to couch their objections in progressive sounding rhetoric or other excuses, because they do feel the pressure from our movement. And that's why we should feel encouraged. We should, we should not put any blind faith on the political establishment, but we should understand that the movement is doing its job. And I have to say, it was really unfortunate that the city council attempted to shut down discussion using legal excuses. And it's just incredible, the Orwellian excuses they have made, basically amounting to saying that we can't have a discussion on this emergency legislation because we are in an emergency. It's, you can't make this stuff up. But the reason they're using these excuses is, as I said, they're feeling pressure from the grassroots, and we need to keep that pressure up. And that's why it's so important that you all have organized this town hall. And the other thing that we should, of course, clarify is, last week, a big business-led group calling itself the Third Door Coalition announced a proposal, and they said that they want to address the homelessness and affordable housing crisis. But the proposal, which is actually a year old and it's been sitting on the shelf for over a year, it's still deafeningly silent and very sparse on details on how they are going to pay for it. And I think we should remember that this is, really coming. It's no coincidence that this vague proposal has been dusted and brought back from the shelves precisely at the moment when regular working people are getting organized to win real big business taxes. It's not an accident. It's because of the pressure. And this move harkens back to the 2018 struggle 2 years ago, when big business and the political establishment formed the so-called one table. Now it's the third door. Then it was the one table coalition to attempt to distract from our movement. And one table, despite all the promises, didn't come up with any real proposals. We welcome any solid proposal to actually raise progressive revenues. We are absolutely for it, and we think that that will be the result of the movement, but nobody has stopped them from coming up with it, but they haven't yet. And earlier this year, the same political and business elite proposed a very modest tax on businesses in King County, through legislation in Olympia, but only if Seattle were prevented from passing a meaningful tax of our own, basically having a ban of some sort on municipal big business taxes. Now, our movement, our Tax Amazon movement, led by the rank and file, made very clear we support any and every progressive revenue measure. We don't complain about where it comes from. If any of the other council members or state legislators was to come forward with a proposal, we would support it and we would celebrate it as a victory for the movement that's been fighting for it. But we also made crystal clear we were and are opposed to any ban on our city's ability to raise progressive revenues. And a lot of us went to Olympia, we talked to legislators, we organized actions, and we were able to ensure that no such ban was going to pass. But what really was revealed there is big business showing their true colors, which is that they refused to support any legislation from Olympia. There was a legislation, but they didn't support it, be even a modest one, because they could not get the real thing that they wanted. The real prize that they were seeking was a ban on Seattle's movements, and they didn't get that. And so for me, this highly publicized launch of Third Door Coalition feels like deja vu. But again, as I said, let me make it clear again, we support any progressive tax on big business. We welcome any serious proposals, but it would be a serious mistake for our movement if we didn't recognize this Third Door Coalition for what it is, which is something that big business has put together, brought back. They had put together this together a year ago. They brought back because they feel the pressure from our movement. Let's not forget that one of the main promoters of the Third Door Coalition is Howard Wright, who gave $25,000 to the big business campaign against the 2018 Amazon tax, which was then followed by the shameful repeal by the majority of the city council. So, you may not agree with me, but I'm not holding my breath for them, people like Howard Wright, to come up with a progressive big business tax. But if they do, that'll be a real victory for the movement. But in the meanwhile, I believe our strategy is very clear. We have to absolutely keep building our movement, because if anything comes out of the Third Door Coalition, it will be because of the pressure they feel from ordinary people fighting for their rights. And that's why tonight is an important opportunity for discussing that. And I wanted to share also the thoughts from Andrew from District 6, who wrote, "When will the richest man and the corporation on the planet pay their fair share? Taxation is the only way for that to happen. Amazon has maintained its level of profit on the backs of the working class, and that imbalance needs to be rectified." And I will add that there are other corporations, roughly 800 corporations would be taxed under our proposal. They are not all Amazon, but they are all cash rich big business. So let's be clear about that. No small business is going to be taxed. In fact, as I said, 98% of small businesses overall are not going to be taxed, which by definition implies all small and medium-sized businesses, and even some large businesses. Small nonprofits are exempted automatically. All grocery stores are exempted, and all public institutions are exempted. So, we have a very strong proposal. We have strong momentum from ordinary people. However, we have to, what we need is to build this movement even stronger and understand who's on our side and who's not. And it's really unfortunate that we don't have the other council members here today. Unfortunately, Councilmember Lisa Herbold, who declared a progressive tax on businesses most benefiting from this growth, is our best option, because we already rely heavily upon regressive property and sales taxes that hit everyone equally. I agree with that statement that was made by Councilmember Herbold to The Guardian in May 2018. She voted for the Amazon tax in May 2018, but then a month later, unfortunately, and in my view, shamefully, joined with 6 of the other 8 council members in repealing the very modest tax. So I think we have seen over and over again what happens, even if we agree that council members are progressive. At the end of the day, actions matter. Words don't matter, because people's stomachs are not filled with food, and they are not housed by kind words from political figures like myself. My obligation as an elected representative is to do the right thing, not just say correct sounding things. And that's why, as Summer said, I take my moral imperative seriously. And I know all of us who are on this call, we take our moral imperative seriously, even if many of the politicians don't. And that's why let's keep building this pressure. Let's have an exciting town hall, and let's build our next steps coming from that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Sawant. That was both inspirational and inspiring, and very thought-provoking. I did want to reemphasize what she talked about this is not polarizing. In Portland, taxing the wealthy, and we're not just talking the top 2% of businesses like we're proposing here in Seattle. What Portland voted overwhelmingly, 60%, to do was to tax the top 10% of their wealthy individuals and the top 6% of those biggest businesses. So that is what Portland has just done last week or the week before, and we can absolutely get there. It's good to have some friendly rivalry. This is a moral imperative, and we cannot view this moral imperative through big business's lens. In my mind, the Third Door Coalition is just another reiteration of Case, who tried to have Councilmember Sawant not even on the council, which would have been the biggest tragedy. So now we're going to have the community panel, and we're going to have different community members. The first one is Joe Segru, who is a resident of D6 and a shop steward of the Music Education Department at the University of Washington with UAW 4121. That's the Union of Academic Student Employees and Postdocs at the University of Washington. They have endorsed Tax Amazon, thank you. And he is a member of Socialist Alternative and a music teacher. So thank you, Joe.
Hi, thank you everybody for being here today. And I wanted to firstly extend solidarity with the people in Minneapolis who are protesting the awful murder of George Floyd. So yeah, as Summer said, I'm a resident of D6, a grad student in music ed at UW. I'm currently student teaching, and I'm a steward of music in the music department in UAW 4121 and a member of Socialist Alternative. And I agree with what folks have been saying about how we face a triple emergency with the COVID crisis right now, a crisis of public health, of joblessness, and of homelessness and affordable housing. And I agree too that it's quite shameful that the other council members who were invited to this event weren't here today. It's my understanding that they didn't send staff either, or a statement aside from Councilmember Mosqueda. They didn't say they would meet with us at any other time. It's really unacceptable. If this changes, then I would love to know. But for right now, this is the information that I have. But working people are here, and we're here to remind the establishment that our movement is strong and we're not going anywhere, and we need to discuss the best way forward. So firstly, to talk about the UAW and union work. The UAW includes over 6,100 graduate and undergraduate student workers at UW, and the worker and the academic student employees do, lots of work as teachers and as researchers that really makes the university run. And the way that their contracts work, they face uncertainty about whether they will be reappointed as teachers or researchers assistants year by year. And this summer, because of the crisis, many could find themselves without work, without an income, without health insurance, and like many other people in our city, possibly facing eviction. And so a majority of us were already rent burdened, with many of us paying over 50% of our income in rent. And, before COVID, we needed these affordable housing options, but this has only made these issues much worse. So that's why the UAW has been involved in phone banking, in dropping off ballots as part of Amazon Tax Prime, building for town halls like this one today, on the coordinating committee, and a whole host of other contributions to the movement, as well as donating $2,500. And I urge other union members to get involved in the struggle as well. Additionally, I wanted to talk about being a teacher. And as a teacher, I've seen this crisis further expose the inequality that our students and their families endure under capitalism at large. And like Shama pointed out, a lot of this is disproportionately towards people of color. Students haven't had technology during distance learning, access to high-speed internet, food, childcare, and all of these things. And just like we know homelessness is a problem for adults in the city, we also can see this with preschool to 12th grade students. The Office of the Superintendent last year recorded that nearly 3,000 students that we know of in Seattle public schools were homeless. And with what's going on right now with the pandemic and with the economic recession that is likely a depression, millions have filed for unemployment, and I fear that number of homeless students will rise after the moratorium evictions is up. Meanwhile, at the same time, Jeff Bezos's personal wealth between mid-March and mid-May went up almost $35 billion, and Amazon is bringing in about $11,000 a second. The state's response to all of this so far has Governor Inslee actually proposing $465 million budget cut, including $116 million from school counselors and $50 million from a fund to fight climate change. And so this very much points to the urgency to taxing big business, to massively expand, rent-controlled, publicly controlled, affordable housing, upgrade tens of thousands of existing homes to meet Green New Deal standards, and create and support thousands of good union jobs. Taxing Amazon is an issue of housing, of jobs and safety, and all of this is linked to education justice. Students all the way from preschool to college should not have to worry about finding an affordable place to live. And a victory here, like Summer was talking about, alongside the victory in Portland, really could reverberate around the country as establishment politicians and corporations are trying to get working people to pay for this crisis. But this movement can actually point towards another solution, making big business pay. So thank you so much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Joe. I just want to reiterate one powerful fact he just said, which is that last year, before the COVID crisis, we had 3,000 K through 12 public school students homeless in Seattle. And this was before the crisis. In Seattle, with our wealth, with all our cranes, with all our booming business, we had 3,000 K through 12 public school students homeless. And that doesn't include the university students, that doesn't include college students, that doesn't include early learning. And that's why this is a moral imperative. So thank you very much. Next, we're gonna have Mama Fatuma, a resident of D1, a community organizer in West Seattle's High Point community since 2017. Thank you. And before that, an organizer at Yesler Terrace and a leader in the East African community in Seattle.
I'm from Ethiopia. I think the problem is too big. I'm very disappointed with Lisa Hamilton because we campaigned for her here. And when she gets a chair, she turned back on us. But it doesn't matter. But the people have problems. The people that we don't speak English very well. We don't know where to go. We don't know where to do. They say stay home. We stay home. And then you don't know where next meal comes from. On top of that, the people, they don't know where they go tomorrow. What way they build the house, whoever live in the house, they don't know how they build the house. Because now 2 months, everybody stay home. I think it's a good idea to tax Amazon to help the people need it. And they don't know where to go. And we have kids. My English is too poor, and I'm very sorry. I participate and I speak with my community, and with Adam, we organize. We're ready to tax Amazon with my community. I'm just talking about. I speak about our community. I speak for my community. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Mama, for sharing the brutal reality of how scared and angry you and the community are. We are angry and scared for you, and that's why we are also taking these actions today. I did want to note that there's at least 73 people, if not more, in live stream. That was as of about 5 minutes ago. And also, Dan Strauss's office has offered to meet with D6 residents, and I'm going to be setting that up. So if you would like to be a part of that, please email me at Summer Stinson, SUMMER, Stinson, STINSON, @gmail.com, and I'll include you in setting up that meeting. Next, we have Jennifer Hall, who is a resident of D1 and a local special education teacher at West Seattle High School. Thank you. And member of the Seattle Educator Association, which has endorsed Tax Amazon, which is great.
Yes, thank you, Summer. I'm very proud of my representative assembly and the Seattle Education Association that they voted 84% at the last representative assembly to support the Tax Amazon movement. And I was a little bit doubtful, because when we've had progressive new business items before, sometimes they've been voted down because, you know, you do have some conservative members of the association. But I think that the reason it passed this time and passed with a relatively high number of votes is that as educators and educational employees, we're seeing firsthand what the effect is on our students of poverty, of toxic capitalism, of all of a sudden having their rents increasing and having to move south and still taking buses and cabs to come to West Seattle High School because they want to graduate, and coming in without having had breakfast and being hungry and not knowing when they're going to eat again. We see this, and right now as we reach out to our students who may not have tech, we are trying to get them all tech, and it's taking a while. That's an equity issue right there. When we reach out, we hear from the parents that they don't have those basic supplies that keep them feeling good and feeling dignified, like laundry detergent and dish soap and things to sanitize the house with. We've heard a fair amount of desperation as we educators become kind of like social workers at this time. I really am thankful to Shama and everyone who's worked for the Tax Amazon initiative. And I did email my councilwoman Herbold a little bit late, but it seems to me that perhaps I need to have a talk with Mama Fadumo, and we need to start emailing Lisa Herbold every day, because I am highly disappointed that she is not involved in this tonight. And I am going to make a commitment right now to contact her more and ask her why not. I think that I want to piggyback on what Joe said about those students who don't have access to tech. There are a lot of them. And my personal feeling about Amazon is that the Seattle School District spends so much money getting everything from Amazon. And we have people of privilege. I see people in my neighborhood ordering from Amazon all the time. I see the trucks pulling up, and it's not like taxing them is going to break them. Bezos is still going to have a whole bunch of his billions. He's still going to have the big megaphone of the Washington Post, and he's still going to have a bunch of employees that are ununionized, and that's another thing that we have to work on, because Amazon is the epitome of a toxic capitalist corporation. It's a monopoly, or practically a monopoly, and it's time for us to stop this terrible situation that we have happening with our students and with poor people and with everyone in Seattle. Because I mean, I'm gonna retire at some point soon and be among those people who are without a lot of stuff. It's time to not have a regressive tax system anymore. And once again, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jennifer Hall, for your work and also the important stories about your students' families and what they're facing. And thank you also for bringing up the concept of privilege. I think that for many of us here, we can sort ourselves either into those who are very, very scared and don't have that privilege and need this tax to pass so that you can survive. And for those of us who have privilege, and I am one of those, we have the obligation to help. We have the obligation to take action, not just post about it on Facebook or put it up or talk to your neighbor. We have the obligation to take action, to show up at city council meetings, to say that we are for this tax, that we need this tax, and fight for this tax. So thank you for bringing up that very, very important point. Also, I want to remind, before introducing the next person, that I want to remind you all to submit your questions in any chat box on your live stream, however you're watching this, because we will be taking questions soon, right after we finish up the panel. Next, we have Dr. Zoe Stansted. She's a District 6 resident, a primary care doctor, and also Vice President of the University of Washington House Staff Association. That's the Union of Residents and Fellow Physicians in the UW system. As you know, the UW system is trying to, or is laying off thousands of employees right now in the midst of this crisis. Zoe and her union are on the front lines, not just in fighting COVID, but also in fighting these very cuts and austerity being demanded by the UW administration in the time of a pandemic. So thank you, Zoe.
Hi, everyone. Like she mentioned, my name is Zoe Sanstead. I'm a family medicine resident physician at UW and the vice president of the UWHA, which is an independent labor union for the residents and fellows of UW. I live in the 6th district. We work all over Seattle, Harborview, UW, but I'm mostly a primary care doctor in Northgate. And I'm joining this call today in solidarity with my colleagues at UW, including many resident physicians who live paycheck to paycheck and who are rent burdened, and my patients who deserve better. All healthcare workers know that good health is determined by more than just biology and medicine. As a primary care doctor, the biggest obstacles to keeping my patients healthy are not a lack of medical expertise or technology. Housing insecurity and homelessness, food insecurity, the lack of access to healthy food, high cost of prescription medications, low income and the high cost of living in Seattle, and employer-based health insurance plans with high premiums and copays are all huge obstacles to my patients staying healthy. This was true before COVID, but is even more true during this crisis. Many of my patients have lost their insurance due to being laid off, have less ability to exercise, less access to healthy food, face eviction and homelessness more than ever before. My patients cannot afford their medications, which often cost hundreds of dollars a month. Seattle has never invested enough in combating these social determinants of health, but I was hopeful that if there was any silver lining to the COVID crisis, it could be that more attention would be paid to these systemic inequities and serious problems with our healthcare system and our unjust society. I hoped that even more people being affected by these issues and more seriously would help bring to light these problems and cause people to work harder to fix them. But instead, due to a global economic crisis, it seems that there is less funding than ever to put towards fixing these problems. All the while, billionaires get richer. We must reverse our regressive tax code to help our patients. And this crisis doesn't just affect our patients, but our healthcare workers as well. As healthcare workers, residents are on the front lines of the fight against COVID. UWHA members have been taking care of patients in the COVID ICUs, acute care wards, and emergency rooms at Harborview, UWMC, and the VA hospital. Dozens of our members, including myself, were redeployed to cover extra shifts caring for COVID patients without hazard pay. Even before COVID, nearly half of all Seattle renters struggled to pay rent, including many of our residents and other healthcare staff. Before COVID, physicians at my clinic were already sounding the alarm that our medical assistants and other frontline staff were not paid enough to survive. Medical assistants and other staff at UW, as well as residents, are paid far below the standard for their job categories. Over the holidays, we had a food drive and ended up donating the collected food to members of our own staff because there were people who were struggling and needy even within our own UW medicine community. And now UW is furloughing around 5,500 employees, all the while our hospital CEO, Dr. Paul Ramsey, takes home a high six-figure salary. Big companies tell us that this is a difficult financial time for them. In our current negotiation sessions with UW, we actually just had Dr. Tim Dellett join us today and tell us all about how they have no more money to increase our pay to a fair wage during COVID or to provide hazard pay. What they miss is that this is a global economic crisis for all people, for the workers, not for the corporations. The people of Seattle, including our healthcare workers and our patients, need relief, and we need it now. Seattle has the responsibility to acknowledge the institutional injustices it's allowed to perpetuate and do something about them. We must tax big companies to provide the services that our community needs that affect our health. Affordable and supportive housing, investments in Green New Deal programs will protect our environment, and emergency COVID aid.
Thank you, Dr. Stanstead, for being on the front lines of this crisis and also for fighting for healthcare as a human right. And thank you for mentioning the fact that healthcare is tied to, in our country, inexplicably tied to our employment status, which means that as people lose their jobs, they lose their healthcare in the time of a pandemic. Next, we have John Burbank, a resident of D6, actually my neighbor, one of my neighbors, and the executive director of the Economic Opportunity Institute, an independent public policy that has for years, organization that has for years, decades, led the fight for progressive taxation in Washington state, and also for protections for our residents. One of the biggest, most recent battles that they won was getting state paid family leave that was decades in the making. So thank you, John. And please tell us more about EOI and your.
Well, thank you very much, Summer, for inviting me to be on this panel. And thank you to Shama, especially for her leadership for progressive taxation. And I want to remind everyone that Shama was one of the catalytic leaders for Seattle's income tax on the affluent, which ended up not going as we thought it would all the way to the Supreme Court, but getting stuck at the Court of Appeals level. And their Court of Appeals decision really opened up the avenue for progressive taxation in the city of Seattle, giving the city essentially carte blanche to put together taxes, progressive taxes. And that is sort of the background for what we can do this year in this pandemic immediately. I'm going to go through some facts and figures, first of all, and people can perhaps ask questions about this or send questions to the share. But let me just run through this really quickly. I've been admonished to make sure that I don't take up too much time. So isn't it time to tax pandemic profiteers? I think it is. So first of all, we have this awful problem because we are a country that's completely dominated by corporate capitalists. We don't have universal health coverage. We don't have universal paid leave standards, which we do in Washington state now. We don't have strong public support for childcare, and we don't have a strong regulatory or social insurance system. And that is not just something that happens. It's made possible by policy choices that have been made by mainstream politicians. And these politicians have perpetuated the growing income inequality in our country, the tax breaks for the wealthy, and disinvestments in people and in infrastructure. They've cultivated in doing this a distrust of government and also really honed in or developed even further institutional racism and anti-immigrant policies and a culture that enables incredibly violent racist acts like happened in Minnesota just on Monday. But they also this also results in actual rising income inequality. So as you can see here, after World War II up until 1973, there's pretty much even Steven in terms of the share of income growth was about 46% for the top 1% and about 46% for the bottom 99%, which means that everyone was enjoying a certain increase, more or less even increase in income. But look what happened after 1973. The top 1%, their income grew by 272%, and the bottom 99%, and that includes a lot of families with incomes as much as 400 or 500,000, that only grew 34%. And since the Great Recession, we can see that the income for the top 1% increased by more than half, while it barely budged for everyone else. One of the reasons, and this is then sort of doubled down in our state with having the most regressive tax system of any state. So when you calculate how much people pay in terms of state and local taxes, we find that the bottom 20% of families pay 18% of their income in state and local taxes, and the top 1% pay 3%, which means that the people in the bottom 20% essentially have to work until mid-March to pay their state and local taxes, while the people in the top 1% are all done in about the second week in January. And what it also means is our reliance on the sales tax and the B&O tax and the property tax means that we can't recover from recessions with public revenue very quickly. So if you see at the bottom here, our 2007-2009 recession, it took 5 years to get per capita personal income back up to what it had been, but it took 11 years to get taxable sales back up to what it had been. And that means that we, this is what happened. 64,000 people lost health coverage. 180,000 people lost dental, vision, podiatry, and other services. 120,000 faced drastically reduced preventative mental health services. 50,000 low-income seniors lost assistance covering prescriptions. 40,000 seniors and people with disabilities had cuts and 46,000 women lost family planning services. So you can see this is really detrimental. And across the board cuts happened. So 23,000 families lost TANF, QAW tuition increased by 75%, 145,000 students were denied state need grants. Parks funding was cut 90%. And you had thousands of school employees and other public students who lost these jobs. Now, this did not have to be the case. The legislature and the governor at that time agreed to put in place austerity budgets, cutting all public services. They could have done something else. They could have raised progressive taxes and saved those services, but they chose not to. And as a result, the recession was deeper and longer than it needed to be. And frankly, a lot of the public services like childcare and higher education have not returned to what they were pre-2009, even just before the COVID pandemic started. So what about the COVID pandemic? Well, as you can see, these are UI claims. It's phenomenal. It's awful. And this is because most of our healthcare is tied to our employment. This is the increase in lost health coverage for people. So now we're actually, the latest figures are we're over 1 million people who do not have health insurance. 1 out of every 7 people does not have any health insurance in our state at the present time. And in terms of who's getting laid off and losing their jobs, it really hits the working class. So we can see here that 77% of people with incomes less than $25,000 have lost their jobs. 74% of people between $35,000 and $50,000 have lost their jobs. When you get up to the $200,000 level, it's a quarter of those people. So who's taking the brunt of this? It's the working class people who are below the median income. But who's benefiting? That's the real question. Who is benefiting? Well, Jeff Bezos is benefiting. As you can see, on March 18th, his net worth was $113 billion. May 19th, it was $147 billion. So his wealth grew by $34.6 billion in 2 months. And you can see the same thing happened with a little bit less of a growth through Bill Gates. And I can tell you it happened with Steve Ballmer and Mackenzie Bezos and the 10 other billionaires in our state. If you take all the billionaires, you see that this tremendous growth over the last 2 months of $434 billion. They are certainly the profiteers from the pandemic. And here's another profiteer from the pandemic. It's Amazon. Their stock price went up. Their stock price went up by more than 25% since January 1st. So they are again another pandemic profiteer. And people say, well, what about Amazon? They do good stuff. Well, Amazon is a real taker. The reason they're a taker, one of the reasons they're a taker is because of their, as someone else mentioned, their monopolistic practices. But another is that they actually take money from the state government. And with this graph, you can see that over the last 6 years, they have taken over $225 million from the state government. That's what they do. They look for a tax exemption, they grab it, they take it, and they extract money from the state that could be going to public services. And this is how, one of the ways Amazon works its magic in the legislature. I think you all probably heard about this workforce education bill that passed last year that was designed to provide free public higher education for very low income people and reduced costs for tuition for people up to about $70,000 of income. Well, that sounded all good. It was going to be funded by a surtax of 1.22% on the large advanced computing businesses like Amazon and Microsoft. And in fact, they got a lot of headlines for saying, oh, tax us. We want you to tax us so we can supply higher education for the people of our state. If you read through the bill, you come to this sentence: in no case will the combined surcharge imposed under this subsection paid by all members of an affiliated group be more than $9 million annually. So that makes this surcharge probably about 0.001%, not 0.12%. And the reason that's in there is that Amazon essentially blackmailed the legislature and said, you have to put this in here or we're going to rearrange our business practices so you're going to lose his taxes. Well, the legislature should have stood up to them and said, screw that, we're going to keep this in there and we're going to make sure that you can't mess around with your tax status, but it didn't. And this is what we get. Anyway, that's a little bit about Amazon. We have an opportunity to tax Amazon in a progressive manner. We should also be looking at taxing the compensation decisions of other employers in the state that are compensating people above 250,000 or 300,000. There's no reason why employers should be encouraged to pay that compensation in the middle of a pandemic when people are literally losing their homes and don't have the money to purchase food. We could also institute a 1% income tax, which the legislature did do, but these things are not in necessary competition with each other. They're complementary, and what we need to do, and we're going to actually need all the revenues that can be brought in from, say, all three of these measures in order to provide the public services that people should expect from a true democracy. So let's make sure we have universal health coverage, that we say no to austerity, that we rebuild our economy, that we build a new world from the ashes of COVID, and that we tax Amazon. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you for giving us the great image of tax Amazon as the phoenix that can rise from the ashes here. And especially thank you also for bringing up the concept of corporate welfare, because that is truly what is going on here in Washington State and in Seattle. In Washington State alone, we have over 700 tax breaks for major corporations and wealthy individuals, and that is more than any other state other than the state of New York. So we really stand alone in a terrible way there, and we need to fix that. Next, we have Erin Cote, who is with 350 Seattle. She's a White Center resident, an organizer in 350 Seattle's Big Businesses tax team. She's a former school teacher at Evergreen High School, and she's a science educator. Thank you, Erin.
Thanks very much, Summer. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you to everyone who's already spoken for their very thoughtful comments. I'm also super excited to see so many other educators on the panel tonight. Shout out to my educators. So in my professional life, I'm a science educator, and I'm here today as an organizer for climate justice. A common thread through both of these roles is helping people understand the connections between things that are not obvious at first glance. This legislation is so important because it does just that. It addresses multiple interconnected crises at once. The crises that I'm talking about are, of course, the longstanding affordability crisis in Seattle, which has been exacerbated by the current economic and health crises of the novel coronavirus. And finally, the climate crisis, which has been looming over us for decades. We know that in all three of these cases, it is low income and communities of color which are most affected. This proposed legislation ensures it is these same communities who will be at the center of the solutions to these challenges. The novel coronavirus has disrupted nearly every part of our lives. Though incredibly challenging, it has also left us with an opportunity to radically change our city. We've seen across the country acceptance of ideas which have long been politically impossible. And so this is the time for bold and innovative solutions to problems that we have allowed to fester for far too long. This legislation provides immediate relief to struggling Seattleites and puts us on the path of building the Seattle we want to live in. The City Council has already committed to making the Green New Deal a reality for our city, and this proposal is a first step in living up to that commitment. It would create thousands of affordable homes and transition tens of thousands of homes off fossil fuels, all while creating about 16,000 well-paid jobs in just the first 5 years. This is the promise of the Green New Deal, using infrastructure and job creation to create a healthier, more resilient, more equitable world. In Seattle, the largest sources of carbon emissions are from transportation and from buildings that run on natural gas. Increasing our density of green and affordable housing both reduces building emissions and reduces the need for people to commute into the city, thereby addressing both of these sources of carbon pollution at the same time. The funds to build a new Seattle must come from those who can afford it. We currently have a shameful tax system where those who can least afford it pay the most in taxes. We need to address these crises, but we cannot continue to tax working people to do so. It would also be morally objectionable to implement austerity and prolong the economic effects of this pandemic. A progressive tax on big business is the most effective and most equitable way to fund Seattle's recovery. There is a lot of wealth in this city, and it's time we start leveraging it. We have an incredible opportunity to be a leader for the nation. We've been a leader in shutting down early and combating this virus, and we now can be a leader in the economic recovery and transition away from fossil fuels and towards a more equitable world. Thank you very much for letting me speak today, and I urge our council members to take bold action to provide relief to our communities and build a better Seattle.
Thank you so much, Erin, for all your thoughts today and your incredible work on the Green New Deal. It's very needed. Last we have on our panel, Kathy Heffernan. She is a resident of D1 and a hospital chaplain at UW Medical Center, which is a member of St. Patrick's Catholic Church. She's a member of St. Patrick's Catholic Church and Valley and Mountain Church, and she's with SEIU 1199 Northwest, and she's a union delegate. And thank you for being on the front lines.
Hi, everybody. As Summer said, I'm Kathy Heffernan, and I am a resident of District 1. I have been here in West Seattle for the better part of the 30 years that I have lived in Seattle. And I just want to share a story where the affordability crisis in Seattle has impacted me. I have watched our city change from one with working class roots to one in which a big corporation, Amazon, unapologetically tries to buy a city council election. In 2015, I experienced this unaffordability when I received a rent increase of 130%. My rent went up from $1,000 a month to $2,300 a month. That was one rent increase, completely legal. That same year, Mayor Murray declared a housing emergency, declared an emergency on homelessness, but in 5 years, little has been done. And today we face a crisis of unprecedented proportions in our lifetime with COVID-19. Not only a healthcare crisis, but an affordability crisis and an unemployment crisis. Things I have been just astounded at. As Shama mentioned before, 100,000 people have now died from this disease in this country. That is more deaths than those who died in the Korean and Vietnam wars. Regarding unemployment, several people have already mentioned this. It's worth mentioning again. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell said that we will hit 25% unemployment by the end of June. And this is a chilling, very chilling thought, because during the Great Depression, unemployment reached 24.9% by 1933, over 3 years after the crash of the stock market. We are nearing this unemployment rate after only 3 months. As a union member of SEIU 1199, I have been appalled at the healthcare system that I work for, University of Washington Medical Center. We had to bargain for our contract when COVID started, when the coronavirus started to rage through the hospitals. And according to our bargaining team, University of Washington Medical Center was probably the worst healthcare system to bargain with in the entire state. Give you some examples of what we had to fight for. A lot of our coworkers in other hospitals were given a $10 increase in their wage for being redeployed. We had to fight for an additional $4. University of Washington also wanted us to, if we were being redeployed from the Northwest campus to Montlake, we had to pay for parking there, even if we were paying for monthly parking up at Northwest. So we got them to lift the gates so everybody could park and not worry about it during this crisis. And we also had to fight for 2 weeks of paid administrative leave if we got COVID. And management wanted to prove somehow that we got it at the hospital and not in the community. So, which is impossible to try and figure out. So we won 2 weeks paid administrative leave, and we had to fight. We had to fight for this. And that's the only way, when we know that's the only way that we can win, is when we fight, and we fight together. So the sad thing, of course, is that, as several people have said, 4,000 people are going to be, or I think somebody said 5,500, which is probably the more accurate count now. Healthcare workers are going to be furloughed, and after being called essential workers for the last 2 months. And many of my coworkers are bracing themselves now for permanent layoffs. And if that happens, we will join the ranks of more than 38 million Americans who've applied for unemployment. As many have mentioned, while working people are furloughed and lose jobs and healthcare and can't afford their rent or their mortgage, the wealth of US billionaires has surged $434 billion, which is an increase of 15%, pretty good raise. And Amazon's Jeff Bezos is set to become the world's first trillionaire. And he's made approximately $34 billion himself during this pandemic. Clearly, there is just no excuse. Clearly, big business can afford to pay a modest tax of 1.3%, modest tax of 1.3% to fund COVID emergency assistance, long-term affordable social housing, and the Green New Deal. This tax would provide immediate cash assistance to up to 100,000 vulnerable households. This tax is crucial and directly addresses the emergency that we face right now. With the implementation of this tax, again, up to 100,000 will receive cash assistance. So the central question facing Seattle, as many other panelists have pointed out, who's going to pay for the COVID crisis? Big business or working people who are struggling already before this crisis? The choice should be clear, but as Noam Chomsky said recently, quote, "The logic of capitalism is lethal," unquote. The logic of capitalism has created, in the first place, a healthcare system that makes money off of people being sick, off of people suffering. The logic of capitalism means billionaires make money off the suffering of ordinary people during a pandemic. We need to stop this crazy making. The council needs to pass the Sawant Morales Amazon tax without watering it down. So, our city council members who aren't here with us ordinary folks today, I ask, which side are you on? Back to you, Summer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for wrapping it up with really that is the crucial question. Who is going to pay to get us back on the right track and for this crisis? The people that, as John Burbank have pointed out, have been making money hand over fist since 1973, big business and the uber wealthy, or more on working families. So next we have, I have a statement actually, sorry, first from Councilmember Teresa Mosqueda. I will read it quickly. I'm sorry, I'm gonna read it so fast, but I wanna get to questions for the panel. And I am sorry, because I do have to read it, so I have to look at two screens while I do this. So the need for revenue and resources to address COVID-19 is great. This virus has exacerbated the already existing inequities for many Seattle residents, including women, people of color, immigrants, low-income workers, working families, small business owners, many in the LGBTQIA community, and for unhoused neighbors. I support any conversation that begins to address our community's needs during the coronavirus emergency and beyond. The ability to respond to the public health crisis and economic hardship created and worsened by COVID requires sufficient revenue, philanthropic efforts, and strong maintenance of our public safety net. The philanthropic efforts are greatly appreciated, but philanthropic support coupled with existing government resources alone are not enough to meet the mounting community needs caused by and made worse by COVID. The reality is that now is a crucial time to provide immediate relief to our community, including working families, small businesses, food security, housing assistance, childcare support, and direct cash assistance. And it's clear that the funding emergency caused by COVID demands a response and relief. The evolving legal analysis says otherwise, which frustrates me, but I support the Council President's recommendation to both ensure we are in compliance with the proclamation issued by Governor Inslee to public agencies that direct any action during the COVID-19 emergency, and to protect the health and safety of city employees and attendees. I remain committed to passing sustainable progressive revenue at the city level to respond to this crisis and its lingering effects. And I look forward to engaging in that process as soon as we get further notice from our law department to move forward. In the meantime, I've held other public engagement opportunities, such as the Economic Realities of COVID Forum that I hosted on Tuesday, May 19th, which included national and local leaders who described the stark economic reality imposed upon us and how to build an economy that centers equity, not austerity. We will continue to highlight the importance of new revenue sources to overcome this budget crisis in the weeks ahead, and look forward to future committee discussions as soon as we are allowed. And again, that was the statement from Councilmember Teresa Mosqueda. And now we're going to go to questions. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat. We've been collecting all the questions, so I have many questions here. And the first question is from Ed Coniglio. He said, I'm also very disappointed in Herbold. Is she scared or what? And does any panel member have a response? And I guess I throw it to those panel members who are in D1. And unfortunately, we did have to have one panel member had to drop off. That was Mama Futamo had to drop off. So if the other panel members from D1 want to respond, I know I emailed her 3 times.
I'll respond. And I think we need to keep our eyes on the prize. The prize is not the council members, the prize is Amazon. And I think that we need to figure out how we can collectively, cooperatively, and complementary pull in as many council members in this effort as possible. And Lisa Herbold was incredibly effective in terms of moving forward the city income tax on the affluent. And so I don't think that we should see her as a problem, but rather as a potential ally in this effort when we figure out the final configurations.
Any other thoughts from a D1 panelist? Jennifer Hall?
Yes, I will jump in a little bit. I think that we need to really keep talking to Lisa and asking her to support this because I think she's kind of between a rock and a hard place sometimes, because there are powerful people in West Seattle who are quite conservative and who ran a more conservative candidate against her. And I fully believe that she is in a meeting about the West Seattle Bridge, because you have a lot of people who are feeling that there is going to be a transportation crisis once more people get back to work. So I think that all we can do is keep calling her, keep emailing her. I guess they don't really want to return phone calls, so better email her. And I think that we should ask her to do some kind of forum on the Tax Amazon campaign for West Seattleites, because there's enough of us here who are for it, and I think she has to listen to us too.
Thank you. The next question is for Councilmember. Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to jump in as also a West Seattle resident. I think we really need to kind of change our perspective and look at this differently. I've heard, and with all due respect to everybody, we elected Lisa, and she needs to be accountable to us, right? So I think one of the fears that I have, first of all, it's a 1.3% tax. And we have to keep reminding people of that, because there's a lot of misperception about there. Oh, this is going to be a tax on individual workers. That's what happened, the last time that this was passed and then repealed a month later. So it's 1.3%. Top 2% of businesses, no small businesses. We need to be really clear about that. And classic example, I think people have brought this up, and rightly so, the bridge and traffic. And that's going to end up coming on, that's going to be taxed. We're all going to be taxed for that when Amazon could fund that easily. And I think we need to be remembering, we need to remember that we need to hold her accountable. So.
Thank you. The next question is for Councilmember Sawant. It is, how can we get more rights for contract workers in Washington State? Many companies in King County hire independent contract workers who have little to no rights compared to regular full-time workers that are called employees, and left stranded as they have to rely on job agencies to provide little to nothing in times like these. And I think that's an excellent question as a employment lawyer by day. So Councilmember Sawant, can you answer?
I'd be happy to, Summer, but as you said, you are an employment lawyer by day. Did you want to first give your sense of how this could be done, and then I'll follow up on that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the concept of independent contractor came about for people who generally had rarefied skills so that they could go in and not have any one person be their employer, and that the whole concept was that they had some mutual ability to come to a contract. And that does not work for most workers in today's age. What companies have done is twist this concept to mean every level of worker within their stream of work could be an independent contractor. So instead of a accountant who could come in and, say have many different clients and set his or her own hours, they're now saying Uber drivers, people who are delivering meals, all of these are independent contractors, even though it's the actual very crux of their business. So California has taken this on very well and said, no, you don't get to continue playing this game. Because obviously, as we know, as most of us are workers within, who don't have an independent right to go negotiate with our either our employer or big business, is that employers and big business take this as it's a take it or leave it contract. There is no negotiating. There is no carving out more protections for individuals, especially when you're talking at the level that many of these people are working. It is just it's called a contract of adhesion. If you want to be an Uber driver, you will accept all these completely awful, limiting, barely able to pay for your car and your mileage rules. And so it is a complete aberration, and we need to have it ceased at our state level and also federal level.
Yeah, I could not agree more with what you just said, Summer. And I would just add that if you look at where these, where the whole idea of contract workers was perpetuated and how it happened through the last several decades, you can see, you can trace the history. It comes right out of the playbook, which is even inevitable, as Kathy quoted Noam Chomsky saying, the logic of capitalism is lethal. And it's inevitable that in this kind of system that in the past decades, when labor movements, especially militant labor movements, really with socialists and fighters on the front lines, won many different kinds of rights that for a certain period were taken for granted by a certain generation, especially by the baby boomer generation. The gains that were won by the labor movement through that kind of organizing, many of them have been snatched back from us by big business interests, by the capitalist class, through decades of historic attacks on unions, attacks on workers as a whole. And one of the ways in which those decades long attacks have manifested in is where workers, there's swaths of the economy now where workers are not considered workers, but they're considered independent contractors or associates. The different kind of terminology that basically denies them their actual rights, that as inadequate as they are, you get when you're recognized on paper legally as a worker, as an employee, let alone a union employee, union member. And so all the things that we are going to see if we don't fight in the way that this recession will unfold. And some of those things showed up on John Burbank's slides about how the cost of the recessions is always put on the shoulders of working people. And part of that cost is through, eroding of our existing rights. Part of it is through increased waves of privatization and, increased waves of privatization and the so-called public-private partnership, which is basically, as the Economic Policy Institute has pointed out, with thorough research and analysis, the public-private partnerships are just euphemisms for private takeover of public resources, where workers lose out and community members and taxpayers lose out. And so all of that is actually on the table now, unless we fight back. I mean, to give you a concrete example, in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, the public school districts in Louisiana were deliberately, it wasn't an act of God, it was a deliberate program by the capitalist class where they completely decimated the public school districts in Louisiana and brought in, wave of charterization, privatization, which it was really meant to be a long-term attack on union rights. And public sector teachers unions are one of the final bastions of that union power. And that's why it's actually exciting, as Erin was saying, that we have so many educators and union educators on our panel today. And so, on the one hand, this is why I'm a socialist, because I don't believe capitalism can be reformed, because every time you try to reform it, decades later, we lose that. And so today's millennial generation is not able to enjoy the benefits for the most part that were won, because they've been taken away now. And we have the gig economy workers and so many workers actually not even recognized as workers. But we do have to fight back concretely. Summer mentioned the struggle in California that was led by the Teamsters, and it was really important victory. That actually came on the heels of a historic victory in New York State that was led by the New York Taxi Drivers Alliance, in which they brought together taxi drivers, medallion holders who are deeply in debt, and Uber and Lyft drivers, rideshare drivers, brought them together and brought the community alongside them, and actually won some key victories. And we need that kind of movement building here. But I would also say in closing that community campaigns like the Amazon tax campaign are also an important component of buttressing what we also need on the other hand, which is workplace struggles. And right now, especially as we head into this great depression-like recession, we do need workplace struggles to address these problems.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Sawant. And thank you also for mentioning New York, because also New York has a lot to teach us about how they fought Amazon as well. So we should continue to learn from California, from Portland, from New York, and take the best examples from elsewhere in the country. I also wanted to remind people that thank you for talking about New Orleans, because a lot of the teachers who lost their jobs, if not most of the teachers who lost their jobs, I believe were women of color, were a very high percentage of those teachers who were unionized and did not get hired back on into the more privatization system. And unfortunately, we are at time. And so we wanted to talk about next steps. And there are some further questions a few people had regarding rentals and renters' rights. And I want to encourage you to please contact either Councilmember Sawant's office with those questions, or also your council member or the citywide council members. But we won't have time for those questions right now. I'm so sorry, but do please contact Councilmember Sawant or other council members with those questions. Because they are very important, and we want to make sure no one slips through the cracks right now. I think there's a couple screens that we're going to have regarding next action steps, because it's always important to take action. Especially, again, I want to remind people who do have privilege to please use your privilege here. And if you're able to call in during the day, we would really like you to call or email tonight or tomorrow to Councilmember Lisa Herbold, Councilmember Dan Strauss, Councilmember Lorena Gonzalez. And the key messages are that you're a constituent, you're disappointed they weren't here tonight, that you'd like them to hear from you, and that you'd like them to pass this, pass Tax Amazon, and that we cannot have austerity, we cannot have cuts. As John Burbank said, we have just barely bounced back from the last recession. And the central question facing Seattle is who is going to pay for the COVID crisis, big business or the working people? So please do call or email tonight. Please continue to call and email. It's very important. If you're a resident of either D6 or D1, please include that in your email, because constituents always get even more of a response. And then the second slide should have, I believe, information about the next City Hall, the next city council meeting, and that is on Monday. And so you can sign up at noon. You want to sign up as soon as you can at noon, and there's the link there. And it's also, you can find it if you just go to the city council page and say public comment. It will give you that, get you that link. And what you want to do is sign up at noon to testify at 2 o'clock to the full council. I've done it before, and it is not scary. It is nice because you're on the phone. You don't even have to get down there, find parking, anything. And you want to talk about the fact that you're a constituent, because obviously if you're in Seattle, your constituent is somebody, and that you're disappointed about who hasn't shown up. Either your council member in D1 or D6 or wherever, as long as it's obviously not D3, working people are suffering and need relief, and that the mayor's austerity plan cannot happen. We cannot have austerity, we cannot have cuts. And again, the big central question, who's going to pay for this crisis, big business or the working people? And again, it is never been easier to be able to testify and give public comment to city council. Thank you very, very much for all your time and attention to this very important topic, especially on such a beautiful day. All of your neighbors and fellow Seattleites, really thank you, because this is crucial right now, and we're having many of these conversations. And please take these conversations forth as you public distance, but talk to your neighbors, because it is important that we do everything we can now to get this legislation passed and tax Amazon. Thank you.
Please, as Summer said, make sure sorry, am I unmuted now? Can you hear me? Okay, sorry. As you were correctly saying, Summer, please, if you asked a question and we didn't have the time to answer, please make sure you email us, keep in contact with Nick Jones in my office. I'm sure Nick will share his email address on the live stream thread now, so you can reach him, or you can email on my name, shama.sawant@seattle.gov. Either way, we will make sure we respond to you, and we definitely want you to not only be in the loop, but also be organizing with us, to be an active member of our movement, because as Kathy was saying, we're not going to win this without a movement. And in fact, the rent increase that she mentioned, that is how our office met Kathy Heffernan, and it was through getting herself and her fellow tenants organized, getting that issue published in the Seattle Times, exposing the owner who was pushing for this kind of criminal rent increase. That is how she and her fellow tenants were able to win that struggle. And that was a real life experience of how when we fight, we can win. And I think that's that's the approach we need to use here. And, we are talking about real people and real lives. And I think we've seen incredibly powerful statistics in the John Burbank presentation about what it actually means. This is going to impact people's lives in so many different ways. And as Mama Fadumo said, people don't know where their next meal is going to come from. Literally, this is the situation they're facing. And so we do have to keep fighting, even if we don't personally need it. We have to fight alongside our fellow community members who do need it. And I will say, on the question about, the council members who've not shown up today, I will say this. For me, it's not so much important if they came to this or that meeting. What's striking this time is that many of the council members that have been mentioned have not attended many meetings, and in fact, they have been some of the instigators of attempting to shut down the discussion in City Hall. And here's what I've been thinking. From the previous city council in 2018, council members Herbold and Gonzalez are two of the three council members who are still on the city council right now, who voted for that shameful repeal of the Amazon tax that year. I mean, that was one of the historic low moments of the Seattle City Council, without a doubt. And I've been thinking so for the last several weeks that most of us have made some mistakes in our lives, in our personal or professional lives. I have my own share of mistakes, and often we may not get the chance to correct our mistakes. Lisa Herbold and Lorena Gonzalez are in this unique situation where they actually have an opportunity to correct their historic mistake and change their legacy. And all they have to do is to say that they support the Amazon tax legislation, and they will push for it, and they will stand up against big business. And it doesn't matter whether they attend this or that meeting. If they say that, then that would show that they are in solidarity with working people, and that they care about what happens to working people. And so nothing is stopping them from using this opportunity. And so what I would say is that we don't have to get into the business of divining what's in the minds of this or that politician. Let's assume the best intentions. The point, though, is that if you're an elected official and if you don't act on what presumably are the best intentions, it doesn't matter in the slightest, because at the end of the day, if you don't push for what's correct, then you have failed working people. And I will tell you from personal experience, it requires real courage to stand against big business. And if you're an elected official for whom ordinary people have fought to get you there, like many of the council members are elected today because ordinary people like Kathy and Summer and others fought for them last year against the Chamber of Commerce. So if you want to actually stand up for the people who fought to get you into City Hall, then you have to do what I'm doing here. And it's not about me, it's about standing with the movement. And I will say, nothing is stopping them from standing with the movement. Nobody is in their way. We would welcome them if they said that they support this. We would welcome them if they said, well, I don't support this proposal, but I have my own substantial proposal for big business tax. I would welcome it. I have no doubt the movement would welcome it. But unfortunately, that is not what has happened. What has happened is that both Herbold and Gonzalez have banded together and led the way, led the establishment charge to shut down the meetings. And we have continued our movement despite that. Our movement has tremendous momentum. It was after they tried to shut down that Seattle Education Association passed the resolution. It was after that the 32nd LD passed it. And now we know the 36th LD of the Democrats also has a resolution that's put forward. The Washington State High School Democrats have passed a resolution in favor of the Amazon tax movement. All of this momentum happened after this attempted shutdown at City Hall of the discussions based on legal excuses. And I should share with everybody that those legal excuses don't have merit in my view. And I'm not an attorney, but a prominent labor attorney, Dimitri Glitzen, who fought for the CTAC $15 an hour ballot initiative. He has spoken alongside me in a press conference a few weeks ago, and has said that he doesn't agree that there is legal merit. But even if they think that they cannot do it right now, nothing is stopping them from saying we absolutely support this, and it's just a matter of a couple of weeks here and there. That is not what has happened, and that is why, rather than getting into a discussion about what their intentions are, what we should see is what the actual reality is. The concrete on the ground reality is that they haven't stood with the movement. And at the same time, on the flip side, they have tremendous pressure on them. Big business has tremendous pressure on them because our movement is going strong, because we have momentum, but we cannot stop here. We have to keep getting organized. If we, folded our tent and went home tonight, we will not win. And that is why the next steps are important. As Summer said, I hope many of you will be there with us on Monday afternoon so that the city council can hear from all of you. And it's not just me there, it will be the whole city council there. All 9 people will be there. Let's have a big turnout. And as John Burbank said, let's begin to build a new world from the ashes of COVID. We can do it. Let's keep fighting for it.